whether he is saying that these signs are real, the miracles have actually happened, and they were done, at least in first century times, by Satan, is not clear. That they were, the power was given by Satan is not clear. It seems to me that it's likely that Satan may have had that ability, that power, during the time that he also seems to have had the power to indwell men against their will or without their invitation and consent. That there was a time when people were attacked by demonic powers and overtaken. Now, that may be those who were in spiritual weaknesses of various kinds. We don't know just who all was subject to those attacks, but apparently people were indwelled by evil spirits without necessarily giving their consent and inviting them to. We have the parable that Jesus tells in Mark chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 12. I think it's in both of those passages, parallel passages, of the demon that left or was cast out of a person. Went out and wandered around, couldn't find that other home, came back to the first one and found it empty and swept. That is, that he had not replaced the void of the demon with some other spiritual faith and power. That's the way most of us interpret that passage anyway. And so he went and found 7 other demons that were worse than himself, and they came back and the latter and invaded the man. And the latter state was worse than the first. That seems to support the idea that I've just stated, that Satan once had that power. In the same context, in the passage about the blasphemy against the Holy Spirit, Jesus describes his casting out of demons as one of the things being done, maybe the only thing being done, to bind the strong man. He says a man cannot go into the house of a strong man and loot the house unless he has somehow done away with the strong man's strength. And he says, so that's what I'm doing, basically, in that passage. I believe that Jesus' miracles, and especially his casting out of demons, was a sign that Satan's powers were being constrained, that they were being brought under control so that all people would have the ability to respond to the gospel when they learned it. That Satan could not bind them and imprison them to the point that they could not be freed by the gospel. That's my opinion on that subject, and that Jesus, during his lifetime and through his death and resurrection, limited those powers and made it so that the gospel would always be God's power to save, no matter how much we were immersed in sin, that we still would have the ability to believe and to obey the gospel and receive forgiveness. All right, any comment, any questions or comments on that before we go on? That relates to what we're talking about here, because we're talking about power being given to the second beast, the religious forces of Rome, particularly those involved, in my view. This beast represents those who were involved with Caesar worship, the religious hierarchy, those who served as priests in the temples, those who preached the message that Caesar is Lord. These would be those who are represented by the second beast. It becomes clear that the first beast has authority over the second beast. The second beast's power and mission is subjugated to that of the Roman Empire and to Caesar. So he was able to give breath to the image of the beast, that is, to give credence to the doctrine that Caesar was Lord, so that people would believe that, give force to the to the enforcement, give power, I should say, to the enforcement of those commands, to proclaim Caesar as Lord at least one time a year, so as to bring the practice of Caesar worship into popular use and majority use, and to make it a means by which Satan could attack the church and bring persecution against the church. Any questions about that view? Yes, yes, sir. No, this is in the Roman Empire. These are not Jews. These are the priests in the temple, anyone with religious authority, and anyone involved in the persecution of the church for religious purposes, because they did not obey the commands of Caesar to worship him and acknowledge him as God. No, they would be Romans. The religion at stake here is Rome worship and Caesar worship. They built temples to Rome as a goddess. The city of Rome, which represented the Roman Empire. They built temples to Caesar, to Domitian, but usually the temples were appropriated by the next Caesar. Once they started building temples in various Caesars, if that Caesar died, then the next Caesar automatically became the object of worship that was recognized in all of these centers of worship, these temples that were built. And there were temples to Rome in various of the cities to which this revelation seems to have first been addressed, the 7 cities in the, of Rome, 7 churches of Rome in these 7 named cities. They offered incense, they offered animal sacrifices, I believe, in fact I'm sure they did, and they practiced other forms of worship that were unique to that particular religion. But he is describing the second beast as the authority promoting faith in and adherence to the idea that Caesar was and Rome were gods, were divine. So I'm using religion in that context, not necessarily an extended set of formalities of regular worship. That wasn't the way polytheism worked. Will is right, and if you didn't hear what he said, each city had its own resident god or goddess. We're familiar with Diana of the Ephesians from Paul's conflict with those representing her in the book of Acts, chapter 20. We know that other cities had their recognized, and many nations had their recognized gods or goddesses. As you traveled, you had no trouble going into the local, if you were a polytheist, if you were an idolater of the Roman Empire and of Greek culture, you had no problem visiting the local temple and eating meat offered to that idol as a form of worship, for instance, or whatever other forms of worship might attract you, of joining in a festival with the local worshipers, even though they weren't worshiping the same god or goddess that you might be worshiping in your home city. They all were part of the same ultimate pantheon and recognition that in this world and universe there were many, many different expressions of divine nature, and all could be worshiped individually. Caesar worship and Rome worship, the religion of Rome, if I can kind of separate it in the political sense, fit into that. They had no problem with people worshiping every other god that they could think of, including the God of the Bible, including Jesus Christ as Lord, as long as Caesar was included. But on that day, when they were called upon to bow down before Caesar and honor him as Lord, those who would not do it then were recognized and, in some cases at least, in some areas, persecuted because of their atheism and of their treason against the decrees of their ruler and their God as their view was. The first beast represents the Caesar who is in power and all of his minions. The second beast represents the religious hierarchy and structure which urges people to worship him as a god. Yes, go ahead. This all ultimately originated with Satan. It was his idea. He inspired, so to speak, Rome to go in this direction, and he backed them. It was his agency and his intervention, perhaps in some way that we don't understand, that enabled them to gain the power and do this. But now it is not a matter of them having what do they call it? Not an enclave, but a communion with Satan and getting their directions through some divine way and going out and doing it as would be envisioned by black magicians, and voodoo believers in today's world. It was not quite that kind of relationship or activity, not that kind of practice. But it had the same basic underlying principle that it was Satan who was behind all of this. Okay. Verses 16 through 18 are probably the fly in the pudding in this chapter as far as our understanding. And I don't think anything in verse 11 through 15 is very difficult for us to comprehend. It's fairly straightforward. The first beast becomes a kind of god. The second beast is given the means by which to promote his divinity and the worship of him. And both of them are servants of the dragon, Satan. But now verses 16 through 18 become more complicated. He, that is the second beast, causes all, the small and the great, the rich and the poor, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead, and he provides that no one will be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. All right, let's stop right there, and let me make the point again. Revelation is written in symbolic, figurative language. Very little in Revelation means what the literal word would suggest it means. The dragon is not a dragon. He doesn't breathe fire. He's not red. The dragon represents a spiritual evil that we know as Satan. A person he is the personification of evil and the major embodiment of the force of evil. But he's not a dragon. The dragon is symbolic. Rome was led by a human being, not a dragon in human form, but he is described as a beast. So when we get to these verses, remember we're still talking about symbolic language. Is there a literal mark that is imposed upon the believers in Domitian or any Caesar as God that is on their right hand or on their foreheads? And is that mark necessary for them to go into the market to buy and sell? Not that I've ever been able to discover through documentation. I don't know of any record of there being an official mark of citizenship in Rome and valid service to the Roman emperor as one of his faithful believers in his divinity, and that being necessary before you go shopping. But the principle is fairly understandable and probably can be supported. Without the favor of Rome, activity and sharing in the peace and prosperity of Rome is limited. Rome is not going to support and defend and extend its gracious assistance to those who do not show the signs of loyalty and patriotism and religious faith to Rome and its emperor. You're not going to be able to function very long if you're outside the pale of good Roman citizenship. And by the end of the first century, that included recognition of the divinity of the empire and of its ruler. Now, we have discovered some documentation from the early from the late first century and the early second century that suggest that there was not at this point at least, there was not an appetite for avid, ferocious persecution of Christians, for seeking them out and eliminating them at this point of the development of official persecution of Christians. The idea was, as expressed in correspondence between Rome and some of its outlying governors and so forth, that if someone was reported as not supporting the deity of Caesar, not confessing him as Lord when it was required, then they should investigate, and if they prove to be a Christian who would not confess and bow down before Caesar, then they could be prosecuted legally and punished by the confiscation of property, by imprisonment, or in extreme cases, even perhaps by death, that this could be done. But it was not we're going to hunt down all of these heretics and get rid of them kind of persecution, not at least at this stage. That came later over the next century or so, but it was not the case. Still, it was a real persecution, and some Christians were being prosecuted. We've already read in the first 3 chapters of at least one martyr among the communities of these Christians, and the promise that there would be others before this was all over with, and then the various visions that we've seen have indicated large numbers of those who have died throughout the history of man because of opposition to their faith and service to God. I don't believe the mark itself is a literal, visible kind of mark. The name of the beast and the number of his name are introduced in verse 17, and then that number is expressed in verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. Here we have biblical proof that I don't have much wisdom, because I don't know what that means. I don't know what the number translates to and what the name is. I don't think that condemns me in any sense or means I'm dumb on other subjects, but at least that wisdom has not been given to me. Was that the first or the second buzzer? First, okay. Then let me quickly read a short section. I'd like to read more. This is from Caird's commentary, which is one of my go-to more academic, scholarly type commentaries. when I want to get a headache if I read too much. Since anyone with intelligence may calculate the number, according to John 17, or the first part of verse 18, John must have thought that the identity of the man was self-evident. Unfortunately for the modern reader, though, it is easy enough to turn a name into a number. It is not so simple to proceed in the opposite direction. Now, in previous paragraphs in this commentary, and also in Summers' commentary, the idea of rephrasing alphabetized names into numbers which represent the name is described as it is shown in ancient literature, and it was practiced in the Hebrew language by the Jews, and practiced also in the Roman Empire in the Greek language, and perhaps also in the Latin language. A letter had a numeric significance. A letter could also be used not just to represent one of the 10 digits, but to represent numbers like 100, 200, 400, 700. Those numbers with symbolic significance or special significance. And so when you got into the later letters of their alphabets, you're talking about more than just 1, 2, 3, 4. I think most of us have tried to figure out the name represented by 666 by giving a separate letter for each digit. That is, whatever number represents 6 would occur 3 times. So if it's the 6th letter in the Greek alphabet, then whatever that would be, it'd be the same letter. That's a misapplication of the concept. The figuring of the meaning of the numbers was cumulative, or it was the summation of the various letters. If you had 3 letters and they had the various values of 7, 9, and 300, then the number would be 316, not 793, whatever. It would be the sums of those 3 numbers. So the number 666 can be arrived at by a variety of digits. You can quickly figure out it can be 200 plus 400 plus 66, or it could be a variety of other numbers. So we have to be careful in applying this. I wish we had more time. That was the second bell. I believe the significance of the number is not the meaning of it, the particular name. I don't know that name was necessarily something that we would relate to today, but it does represent the authority, the civil authority that was imposed upon God's people, and that they must beware of submitting to and bowing down to that number, even if it costs you the ability to go and take advantage of the best sale in town because you didn't have the mark of the beast or you didn't know the name of the beast. Don't do it. It's not worth it. That's the primary meaning. So I'm going to leave this at that. If you have a question, if you want to bring up something else from chapter 13 next week, we will get into that. But for now, we're going to move on. We've only got 2 or 3 Sundays left in the month of December, 3 maybe, and